The evening was intended to be peaceful, simply another staged dinner party with cameras catching well-executed moments and laughs. But instead, it descended into a scenario that nobody had anticipated. Fans are reliving the startling information, and reports are pouring in. According to reports, Yandy shifted the focus to her own husband, Mendeecees, revealing intimate details that left everyone in shock as dishes clattered and glasses shook on the table. Those who were there said it was unlike anything they had ever seen before, as what was supposed to be a controlled evening descended into complete anarchy. According to witnesses, the room froze as Yandy's comments pierced the atmosphere. Mendeecees tried to push back, but his voice shook and his face tightened. However, before the dust could suddenly, Sierra intervened, taking things to a whole new level. Both cast members and viewers were left in full shock by the ensuing yelling, accusations, and erupting emotions. The main question that everyone is now asking is, why did Yandy decide to make these disclosures at this time? Why didn't Sierra calm things down instead of going crazy? According to rumors, long-kept secrets, unspoken disputes, and betrayals are finally coming to light. After that night, one thing is for sure, nothing will ever be the same. Like the quiet before a storm, the atmosphere around the table was tight, but oddly serene as the evening went on. The surface-level conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the glossy smiles were all captured on camera. Those there, however, sensed a deeper undercurrent behind it all. Yandy sat calmly, her gaze flitting from one person to another as though she were practicing the words that were beginning to form in the back of her mind. Sierra watched intently, prepared to step in if things became messy, while Mendeecees leaned slightly toward her, oblivious to what was about to happen. What started off as a typical supper soon changed. According to reports, Yandy's voice abruptly became sharper, and her tone shifted with each syllable sounding like a stone hurled into quiet water. At first, she spoke with a calm precision that made others uncomfortable rather than with rage. Looking straight at Mendeecees, she allegedly said, "There are times when the truth just needs to be said." Forks froze in the air at that instant. All eyes were fixed on the couple when the conversation ceased, taken by surprise. Mendeecees laughed nervously, brushing off her remarks as light-hearted repartee. Witnesses, however, assert that Yandy did not overlook it. She spoke as she leaned closer, saying something that left everyone speechless. Whatever she disclosed, it was honest and unvarnished, and it opened a wound that had been kept closed. For too long, the air immediately became thicker. Later, fans wrote on social media that Mendeecees' face said it all. He experienced shock, denial, and a brief outburst of rage as he attempted to regain control. The mood changed sharply. The steady hum of the supper became a flurry of whispers and gasps as voices started to rise. According to one source, Sierra, who had been silent up until that point, slammed her hand on the table and said, "Enough is enough. Stop playing games with us." Her words caused tension to rise even more, thrusting her into the middle of a quarrel that, on the surface, had nothing to do with her. Fans who later watched excerpts online claimed they had never seen Mendeecees so obviously shaken as the debate. Heated up, he yelled at Yandy, not the group, accusing her of attempting to make him look bad in front of everyone. "You believe that this is the location and time?" According to reports. He leaned forward and snapped, his chair scraping the floor. Yandy refused to give up. With a steady gaze, she raised her chin and informed him that the days of acting were long gone. It was impossible to ignore the unadulterated emotion leaking from that table. According to insiders, Erica, who was seated a few seats away, attempted to intervene by telling them to calm down before things got out of hand. Sierra, however, would have none of it. She launched with her own charges, speaking in a level that even the peacemakers were quiet. She is said to have yelled, "If we're exposing truths tonight, then let's not hold anything back." The room becomes a battlefield due to her enthusiasm. The way things were said had just as much of an impact as the words themselves. Years of unsaid tension appeared to be weighed down in every syllable. Later, fans conjectured that Yandy and Mendeecees weren't the only parties involved in the dispute. It had to do with more profound fissures in their group that had been neglected for too long. The fight was no longer between two persons as soon as Sierra stepped in. It turned into a sweeping storm. Up each person at the table. Mendeecees attempted to defend himself, making arguments that sounded less like logical reasoning and more like last-ditch efforts to save his pride. The reactions were explosive, with some guests sitting wide-eyed and covering their mouths as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. "You're twisting things," he said, his voice thick with frustration. But Yandy's response was sharper, accusing him of concealing truths that she was no longer willing to carry silently. Her words weren't just for him, but for everyone in attendance, almost like a public declaration that she refused to remain in the shadows any longer. Social media then erupted with comments like, "That was the most unfiltered moment in reality. TV, and I've never seen a dinner turn into a courtroom scene so fast," as others stared down at their plates, obviously uncomfortable but unwilling to join in the ruckus. Sierra's involvement only made the chaos worse. She wasn't just shouting, she was pointing fingers, her voice shaking with the intensity of someone who had obviously been keeping opinions to herself for far too long. Fans acknowledged that the shockwaves extended beyond the cast, drawing viewers into the drama as if they were sitting at the table themselves. "You all think you're the only ones with secrets," she said, shaking her head. "Stop acting like this is just about one couple. It's about all of us." Her words stoked suspicions that the story had several layers with secrets piled on top of secrets, all ready to blow up. Mendeecees, clearly upset, attempted to defend himself. And witnesses remember him raising his voice above the din, saying that he wouldn't allow anyone to bring him down. "Say what you want, but don't come for me." With his eyes fixed on Yandy, he allegedly said, like, "I'm the villain here," although his comments were intended for the whole room. As Sierra persisted in refuting every defense he offered, the tension between them grew unavoidable. Once tastefully decorated and attractive, the dinner scene now resembled a battlefield. Glasses shook from the force of hammering fists on the table, napkins were thrown aside, and voices mingled until it was almost impossible to tell one from the other. According to insiders, security became tense at one point, keeping a tight eye on things in case the verbal altercation turned violent. Later, fans made jokes on the internet claiming the supper required more referees than servers. However, beneath all of the yelling was something deeper, unadulterated weakness. There was more to Yandy's choice to speak up than merely conflict. It has to do with release. For too long, she had harbored feelings, uncertainties, and suspicions, and she could no longer keep them back at that time. Her eyes gleamed with the weight of repressed pain rather than anger. Even her detractors acknowledged that her outburst had a very human quality. But Mendeecees wasn't prepared to be weak. Every word he spoke was tinged with the desperation of someone attempting to maintain control because his pride wouldn't let him. Later, supporters argued over whether his ire sprang from being falsely accused or from being revealed in unexpected ways. In any case, the entire event was made more compelling by his inability to remain composed. The ensuing hush was nearly as deafening as the shouting as the dust started to settle, at least temporarily. Nobody made a move. Nobody. The whole room sat suspended in the aftermath of facts too heavy to ignore for a moment as they touched their meals. The hush, according to witnesses, seemed to last forever, as if everyone there understood that nothing could ever return to as it had been before that night. The oppressive quiet lingered over the table. It wasn't merely silent. Well, it was. The quiet that made you think the world had stopped and was just waiting for someone to do anything. Nobody was brave enough to drink any water. No one made an effort to diffuse the atmosphere by laughing nervously. After Yandy's disclosures and Sierra's furious reaction, it seemed as though the air itself had frozen. However, stillness seldom lasts long in these circles. Sierra sat back in her chair and stared at Mendeecees, defying him to disagree with her. She spoke. She spoke. In a deeper, lower voice that was somehow crisper. "You think you can hide behind your charm forever?" she inquired. The room immediately responded. "People are tired of pretending." Some people murmur under their breath. Others gasp and shake. Their heads. Mendeecees clenched his jaw, his body language revealing how close he was to losing control. Witnesses later reported that he pushed his chair back and stood up, his hands resting on the table as he looked down at Sierra. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said firmly, his voice steady but laced with anger. Yandy, still seated, kept her calm. It was evident that she wasn't just throwing shade. She was ripping open wounds that everyone had attempted. To ignore the dynamic between them was electric, and fans later described it online as a showdown that felt bigger than any scripted drama could deliver. The way Sierra pushed forward without hesitation, the way Mendeecees struggled to maintain, dominance and Yandy's refusal to look away were all too raw to be ignored. Erica attempted to step in again, her voice shaking as she said, "Everyone just calm down. This is becoming unmanageable." However, rather than Sierra wheeled toward her and accused her of constantly playing, saying peacemaker, but in reality, she knew just as much as everyone else. Her words added another layer to the fire-cooling process. Sierra growled, "Don't pretend you're innocent. You've heard and seen things, but you sit there acting like none of it matters." Following the release of this video, fans debated whether Sierra had gone too far or had just spoken what everyone else was too scared to acknowledge. Erica appeared surprised, her mouth opening and closing silently, caught off guard by the attack. One fan said, "She's messy, but she's right," while another said, "She's just stirring things up to get attention." Everyone agreed that the energy at that dinner was unlike anything they had ever witnessed, regardless of the side they took. Yandy finally spoke, her tone trembling as she said, "I kept quiet for so long because I thought it was better to protect the family." But silence having only made things worse. Worse. "You're exaggerating, trying to make me look bad," Mendeecees said, turning to face her and shaking his head. Yandy's response, however, was prompt and unwavering. "I'm not making you look bad. You did that all by yourself." The room erupted once more, this time with overlapping voices, and Sierra shouted her agreement. Others pleaded for composure, and the dinner was in ruins. And fans later commented that it was no longer a dinner but rather a public trial with everyone playing judge and jury. What shocked people the most, according to reports, was how old secrets seemed to resurface one after another. Sierra reportedly didn't stop at accusing Mendeecees. She hinted at past betrayals within the group, leaving others stunned and defensive. "Don't sit there acting perfect," she allegedly told another guest amid the chaos. Yandy's tears started to form, but they weren't the tears of weakness. Fans reported that they looked like the tears of someone finally freed from the burden of silence. She wiped them quickly, refusing to let them be mistaken for defeat. "You don't get to make me feel small anymore," she told Mendeecees, her voice steadying again. "Everyone here has dirt, and if tonight's the night of truth, then so be it." "This is nothing but lies twisted into drama," Mendeecees insisted, pacing now, instead of sitting. Frustration was evident on his face, but the more he spoke, the less convincing he sounded. Sierra threw her hands up dramatically, scoffing. "Then prove it." Those who watched later acknowledged that moment gave them chills, calling it one of the most powerful statements Yandy had ever made. "Prove your cleanliness to us, Kay, because it appears that Yandy isn't the only person who is sick of your games." At the moment, even those who wished to stay out of the spotlight couldn't help but watch the implosion unfolding before their eyes as the back and forth left others exhausted. But no one dared to leave their seats. Online reactions reflected the chaos, with some fans supporting Yandy and applauding her bravery in speaking up despite the danger. while others defended Mendeecees and accused the look on Yandy's face after the shouting stopped was perhaps the most haunting aspect of the evening. She appeared lighter, almost relieved, while Mendeecees appeared heavier, weighed down by the accusations hanging in the air. It wasn't just about winning an argument anymore. It was about truth versus fiction. Some accused women of ambushing him in a setting intended to humiliate him, while others focused solely on Sierra, labeling her the night's hero or the ultimate instigator. You wanted to keep the table polished and perfect, but tonight the truth flipped it over, Sierra said, leaning forward once more and making sure everyone heard. Denial, exposure versus control. The words sent another ripple through the room, reminding everyone that once chaos is unleashed, it cannot be contained. The evening continued in an uneasy silence, broken by sporadic outbursts of argument. Number one touched their food and no one laughed. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere around the table changed from pure rage to something darker. An undercurrent of mistrust and suspicion that lingered like smoke after a fire. No one tried to pretend. Anymore, the atmosphere had changed permanently, leaving the sense that something irreversible had just taken place. Despite this, there was a strange anticipation in the air, even in the midst of the wreckage. Fans who watched the clips later admitted they couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. That the dinner was just the spark of something bigger, something that would unravel far beyond the walls of that room. People were watching each other instead of Yandy and Mendeecees, waiting to see who might be the next to speak up, the next to be exposed. Sierra, still full of fire, wasn't finished, and she tapped her fingers rhythmically on the table. The sound piercing, the thick tension. "You're not the only one who has something to hide," she muttered, her eyes darting toward another corner of the table. The guests froze, their faces revealing panic before she even mentioned names. Oh. Men immediately seized on it, using it as ammunition. "See?" he barked. Yandy leaned back, her hand pressed against her forehead, as if the weight of it all was too heavy. "This wasn't what I wanted," she whispered, but her voice cracked, revealing her exhaustion. According to whispers, she was ready to drag everyone into the chaos, determined to prove that if she was going to burn bridges, she wasn't going to do it alone. The room had already seen and heard too much, and the cracks in his composure were impossible to ignore. Erica finally spoke again, her voice firmer now, almost trembling with the courage she had to muster. "If all of you keep going like this, there won't be anything left. No friendship, no trust, nothing. This is just manipulation." She wasn't the one who started the drama. His tone was sharp and desperate, as if he was clinging to any thread that might restore his reputation. "You think it's just me versus you," she said, her voice steady now, "but you don't realize." The cameras reportedly captured Yandy closing, her eyes as if replaying every decision that led to this moment. And when she opened them, her gaze locked on Mendeecees once more. No one wanted reconciliation. They wanted resolution, and that meant digging deeper. Everyone has been observing. Everyone is aware. These stories are not mine. You made them. Fans later analyzed this moment in great detail, pointing out how the force of her words seemed to strip away the last layer of denial that Mendeecees was clinging to. "Exactly," Sierra yelled, slamming her hand on the table. "This isn't a game anymore. People are tired of watching you play the role of perfect husband when the reality is so far from that." The accusation hung heavy, impossible to escape. Sierra wasn't going to give him the last word, so she got up and followed him halfway across the room. "Running away won't erase the truth," she yelled, and he spun around, pointing at her. "You don't know the truth." His voice shook with both desperation and rage. The tension broke when Mendeecees attempted to leave, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape and turning to walk out. Yandy stayed at the table, watching it unfold with a face that looked both broken and resolute. As though she had finally accepted that the man she had defended for so long was being stripped bare in front of everyone. and there was nothing left to shield him with. Social media caught fire when footage leaked. Witnesses later described the scene as two storms colliding with neither willing to back down. Everyone was rushing to separate them before things escalated physically. The online arguments mirrored those at the table, with people yelling in comments, exchanging insults, and analyzing every word as if deciphering a mystery. Hashtags like Table Shattered and Truth Night trended for hours, and some even made jokes about how the dinner looked more like a courtroom without a judge than a gathering. However, even after Mendeecees was dragged back toward the table, the focus shifted once more, this time with, "If you want the truth, then let's talk about the nights you didn't come home," Yandy shouted, her voice piercing the background like a blade after finally deciding she had had enough of defending her image. There was a gasp in the room. Mendeecees appeared as though the earth had been torn out from under him, and Ciara covered her mouth. The charges came down with a bang. His eyes darted about uneasily, betraying him, yet he stammered over his words, rejecting them. The ensuing quiet was not one of tranquility. It was the quiet of astonishment, of insight, of understanding that just now something irrevocable had come to light. "How long?" insisted Ciara. Her tone was harsh and unrelenting. "How long were you going? To keep that hidden while acting like the rest of us are crazy?" Mendeecees' defense broke down even further. "You have no idea what was going on in my life at the time," he murmured. However, the harm had already been done. After watching the video online, fans were astounded by what they heard. People expressed shock, rage, and pity for Yandy in their comment sections. Some even tagged her and said, "You deserve better." Yandy's face was what added to the weight of the situation. There was no shouting, no anger, only a silent acceptance that felt more agonizing than any possible eruption. "I tried to forgive. I tried to forget," she uttered quietly. "But maybe forgetting was my biggest mistake." The atmosphere in the room cooled, as if everyone knew they were watching something much more significant than a marriage fall apart. It was the disintegration of a whole image that had been meticulously preserved for years. Ciara triumphantly crossed her arms and leaned back. Her words, "There it is," the mask finally slipped. Her triumph didn't seem very pleasant, though. Rather, it made everyone uncomfortable. Because what more might be hidden beneath the surface if Yandy could uncover this? People felt that no relationship in that room could ever be restored once the dinner had devolved from conflict to destruction. However, nobody took anything to go, desperate to see how far it might go and how many more secrets could be brought to light before the night was up. They were confined. His quietness following Yandy's admission was nearly intolerable. Glasses were unopened, forks were left on plates, and nobody dared to breathe too loudly. The whole room seemed to be holding its breath, anticipating what would happen next. Mendeecees stayed motionless, his face white, his mouth moving back and forth as if he wanted to answer but was at a loss for words. The mass of, despite Ciara's angry outbursts, Yandy's calm accusation pressed down on him more forcefully. Then he whispered, "You don't know what you're talking about." However, even he didn't appear to believe what he was saying. Ciara's voice was piercing and cutting as she leaned closer. "So now she's lying too. Come on, Mendeecees. Everybody can see you're cornered. Every excuse, every denial, it's crumbling right in front of us." Her voice had a sting. "It's obvious." The nodding from those seated around the table, however, made it hurt much more. Others began to publicly concur for the first time, no longer hesitant to express their skepticism. Despite the absence of tears, Yandy's eyes gleamed. "I was never lying for myself," she added quietly this time. Her words were so definitive and weighty that they sliced through the turmoil and settled like an ending. "I was lying for us, for our family, for our children, for the image we wanted the world to see. And now I can't do that anymore." Everyone knew it was inevitable, but no one wanted it. The table moved uncomfortably. While some visitors avoided eye contact with Mendeecees, others gazed at him, as if attempting to determine the proportion of pride and shame in his silence. Sierra suddenly lost patience and smashed her fist down on the table once more. "What do you know? Let's quit acting like this is all about Yandy and Mendeecees if we're exposing the truth. Other people here have also been concealing skeletons." With a blurt, she gestured to another visitor. The room was filled with gasps. She was no longer merely present to confront Mendeecees. She wanted to burn to the ground all night long. In an attempt to control her, Yandy shook her head. But it was too late. The attention was what Sierra thrived on. She also didn't want to lose the spotlight while the cameras were filming. She snarled at the visitor. "Don't pretend to be innocent, since the murmurs have reached me. The texts are visible to me." The defendant's cheeks flushed as they stammered. Echoing Mendeecees' earlier statement, they yelled, "You don't know what you're talking about." However, the harm had already been done. The space became a suspicious gallery. Everyone is observing one another, wondering who will be called out next. It was both a boon and a bane for Mendeecees. The hurt of what had already been revealed persisted even after the spotlight moved away from him. He sagged back in his seat and gave Sierra a glare that seemed to be a tacit vow of revenge for the humiliation. Sierra, however, was not scared. Voice lowered but remained sharp enough for everyone to hear as she leaned closer. "What's already out there cannot be removed, no matter how much you gaze. Whether you like it or not, the truth will eventually come to light." The air became thicker and heavier. Every effort to escape the turmoil was unsuccessful. The dinner had turned into something more sinister than anyone had anticipated. Relationships were no longer the only thing at stake. It was about bringing to light flaws, dismantling facades, and making people face realities they had long suppressed. After being silent for the majority of the blasts, Erica abruptly spoke up once more. Her voice shook with desperation and dread. "Everything is being destroyed by this. Even though you can't see it, once you say these things, they can't be taken back. The cameras are in motion. Families, children, and individuals will all witness." Her warning, however, was ignored. No cry for peace could quench the need for discoveries. After viewing the video, many compared it to witnessing a fire spread in real time. Nobody was able to turn away, despite the fact that they knew it would only leave ashes in its wake. Mendeecees made one final attempt at self-defense. Now he was firmer, almost urgent in his tone. "You don't know me that well, despite your belief that you do. You have no idea how much I've sacrificed and what I've done to protect my family." But his remarks merely prompted more incredulity rather than pity. Yandy leaned forward and spoke in a tremulous but clear voice. "You don't have to betray your family in order to keep them secure. It's just served to tear us apart. So don't try to make it into something admirable." He was silenced by her words. This was no longer rage. It was heartache. It felt like the room was closing in on itself. The sounds of the outside world subside. Everyone in the room realized they were witnessing the fall of something enormous. The appearance of unity, the delusion of strength, and the picture of a power couple. In that instant, everything fell apart. Sierra smirked with satisfaction as she sat back. But even she appeared to understand that the situation was more significant than her personal grudge. No one could have predicted how far the night had spiraled. Fans who subsequently analyzed each clip identified one eerie element as the commotion subsided into an uncomfortable silence. Yandy never spoke louder. Despite all of the yelling, the charges, and the emotional upheaval, she remained composed. Her remarks were heavy and purposeful. She appeared more like a judge rendering a final decision than a participant. There was an unsettling silence as the meal came to a conclusion. Rather than reconciliation or closure,